So welcome everyone. Today we have another new episodes and we will discuss about digital enterprise. And we have our speakers, Mr. Markley, Mr. David Schumacher, DC Simon, Professor Edward, and we have our friend from South Africa, Madam Brenda. So I want to start from Professor Edward regarding this digital enterprise.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Um, when you talk about digital enterprises, let's start by saying what digital is. And what it means, of course, is that somehow you're dealing with zeros and ones. That is, with data that can go into a computer. I suggest that the best way to understand it is to refer to the work of Peter Diamandis and Stephen Kotler. Um, in their various books. Bold is a very good book by these gentlemen, and the future is faster than you think. What they do is they explain what it is, what we're talking about when we talk about digitalizing in the full context of businesses and enterprises and economies. And it starts with being able to reduce any kind of good or service to data, to digits. And I'll give you one of the best examples is photography in the United States and of course worldwide for many decades, if you wanted to reproduce an image, you had to put a piece of film into a camera and the light would come in through the lens, of course, and it would expose the film. And then you had to take the film out and send it to a place to be processed. By the way, when I was a student, I worked my way through college, and one of the jobs I had was working in a big photo processing plant. It was a huge facility. They had rolls of paper that were like 5 feet high that they would put onto the machines to print the photographs. And then, of course, you had to get them back to the owner of the photographs. Kodak was one of the biggest companies in the world, one of the most successful companies in the world. Well, an inventor at Kodak came up with this idea of digital photographs. That is, being able to take an image and instead of having it on paper, you could simply reproduce it on a screen with data, with digits. And Kodak thought, well, this is very primitive at the moment. The photos are really poor quality. And so we're not going to really do anything with this because our money is being made, by, producing huge reams of photo paper and film and giving and selling to people with cameras and all. But of course, what happened with digitalization is Moore's law meant that every year and a half to 2 years, processing power would double, which meant it went up exponentially. And so, of course, over the next decade or so, the ability of a digital camera to reproduce a high quality image went up and up and up and up. But Kodak was still focused on their little area of producing film and producing paper. And of course, guess what? Kodak ended up going bankrupt because they did not appreciate digitalization. And so that's an example of digitalization in the business area. And of course, one of the things I'll mention, and again, I call your attention to Peter Diamandis' excellent work in this area, is at first when you're starting to digitalize any kind of good or service, okay? And it doesn't have to be just film processing and data processing and so forth. At first, it looks deceptive. It looks like, well, this is kind of nice, but it's not going anywhere. And then, of course, what happens is it starts to grow. Moore's law kicks in, as it were, as processing speed increases, and then it begins to disrupt established industries. One of the areas, by the way, that it's doing right now is 3D printing. And a decade ago, 3D printing was you could print little toys and little cute things, and that was nice. But what does it have to do with the real world? Well, what it has to do with the real world now is that we're getting digital printers that can print a different kind of materials. So you can 3D print a house. Now, that's not how most houses are built at the moment. But as the costs come down, you can imagine that being the case, or you could 3D print other things. Anyway, if you're running a business, you have to think about how can this ability, how can this capacity help my enterprise or help my efforts?
Mhm. Thank you. Madam DC Simon, how do you want to analyze today's topic, digital enterprise?
Thank you. I loved Professor Hughes Hudgens' examples because taking digital photos and explaining how we went from flat print, beautiful, rich photos to fully life, digital life is fascinating and where I love to be. I work in digital transformation. And so I am taking services that were traditionally done when you go to a store, you go to purchase something, um, to a richer after COVID environment. And post COVID changed, totally disrupted our business. It totally disrupted the way we conducted business, the way we did our work, and the way we consumed our products. Probably for life, things are changed. Even as people start to go back out into the world, the way that they go back out is different. So digital transformation is here. It's essential. It's essential for world health. It's essential for business.
Yeah.
I am fascinated at the logic of taking. I'm a ServiceNow IT person, so I help people take their existing business process and transform it digitally. And a lot of work goes behind that at touching people, process, and technology. So, as Professor Hudgens had talked about, the notion of disruption or staying in the flow of innovation. Every business is challenged with that today. Every business has more technical, security, and IT capabilities to deal with. They have new levels of marketing and service delivery. So let us be part of the solution. And the solution is bringing services to market that can be consumed and managed digitally.
Thank you. Madam Brenda, how do you want to analyze today's topic? Even you are part of Industry 4.0 and many interesting projects you are handling in South Africa and on behalf of TEF. Brenda, can you hear me?
Unmute, Brenda. Unmute.
Brenda, can you hear me? Sorry, I think. Anyway,
Yes, I
Professor.
can hear you. I was just
Okay.
on mute. Thank you so much. And I'm just gonna pick it. Okay. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just going to pick up from what Professor Hudgens and Dawn have mentioned around the digital enterprise and the transformation that comes with digitizing enterprises. I think for me, coming from a process background and also being a risk manager by profession, whenever there's this transformation happening in enterprises, I'm always looking at what are the opportunities and what are the threats that come with this. I think one thing that as we move and as we transform into these different eras and into these different phases of technology specifically, is that we fail to have a look at where we are as organizations, and then jump into the new thing that comes, and then we want to run with it. That we have seen in the past that have resulted in the break or make of a lot of organization. So as we transform, my call is always to say, as we digitize, as we move into this fourth industrial revolution, let's look at our current practices. Let's look at our current processes, our policies, and say, if we move on and digitize, are we ready for the digitization? And to what extent are we ready for the digitization? Because if we jump onto the bandwagon, we might just, in an effort to be successful and catch up with the trend, just kill ourselves. So I think for me, it is as amazing as it is, we need to really have a look at our business and do an impact analysis, do a needs analysis, understand exactly how it's going to impact our processes, and ensure that we don't let technology drive our process. It has to be the other way around. Make sure that our policies, our processes are fit enough to ensure that the technology becomes the enabler what it is of our objectives, of what it is that we're trying to achieve in our organization.
Thank you. Professor David.
Well, hello, everyone. Excellent comments so far. And I'm sure that they'll continue. Let me see if I can help continue that a little bit. Talking about digital enterprise, my background is, those that have heard me talk before know that it is in digital technology and has been for decades. But I really think the focus of digital enterprise, where I want to go with this today, is more from the business aspect of that. And I think that's essential just for the reasons that Brenda talked about. Though I love technology, business has to be the driver of the technology, not the other way around. So today's topic, digital enterprise, I'm looking at that from the aspect of what's been going on in the business world now for slowly for about a decade, and really started to pick up steam with COVID, as businesses went to adapt to try to find a way to stay afloat through 2020. But as I said, it started long before that with competition from the web, from sales. So this transition's been going on for a while, and digital enterprise itself has actually become quite a buzzword. If you take and type digital enterprise into a search engine and look for a definition, there are a myriad of definitions. Some of them are pretty much anything that's web-based. You know, if I can get a website up, I'm going to compete with Amazon. I'm going to start selling my stuff online. That's digital enterprise. Others will define it as, gee, all things technology, which really isn't much of a definition when you think about it. The way I defined digital enterprise is it has to be at the heart of the business. As Brenda said, it starts with the business processes, not with the technology itself. Sure, you'll see businesses that will take and put technology at the edges, if you will. And what I mean by technology at the edges is if they have retail stores, if they have customer service sites, if at the contact points of their business. And yes, that's digitalization to a point. But really, digitalization starts at the core of the business on how all business operations are done, bringing digital technology into that, where they make sense, where they are an enabler of that technology. So it starts at the headquarters, it starts at the regional offices, it starts then moving out into the periphery to the edges, not the other way around, which is typically how digitalization has been done. Digitalization in a digital enterprise is how you produce your products, not just digital products, but products that are made in the factory, and the factories are digitized. And it's how you determine where you are going to be able to seize an advantage in the marketplace in your business. It's the core driver for how you produce value, how you produce shareholder value, how you produce market value. When you've done all those things, then you're working towards a digital enterprise. And why would you do this? To be more competitive, to be more economically efficient, and to be more agile. This can reduce or can produce organizations that are flatter, fewer levels of hierarchy, which makes them faster, which makes them, in many cases, more functional and clearly more agile as we're moving in a time of exponential growth for technology. There's a number of, I took a look at some companies. I wanted to look at some companies that have been going through the digital technology trend. And in my area, many of these companies are very well known. Best Buy is an electronics retailer, for example. They went through a 7-year transition to become a digital enterprise. I want to point that out because they're one of the more successful in this. And it's not an overnight operation. This is something that takes being committed to, having good plans, and having good follow through. They went through and they changed their marketing from traditional print marketing to digital marketing. They changed the structure of their stores. They changed how customers ordered products. They changed how service delivery was done for both products and for services that they offer. Over this 7-year period, this is what their stock price, I went and looked it up. In 2012, you could buy a share of Best Buy for about $24. When I checked yesterday, it was over $120. They're clearly going in the right direction. Now, another retail store, Best Buy is electronics. Another retail store that's more general merchandise is a company called Target. And they did much of the same sort of thing, changing their store, changing how they advertise, going into social media advertising, going into web print advertising, competing against their own brick and mortar stores by having people order online. And what did this do for them? In 2017, their stock price was $53. Yesterday, it was over $200. This is the way forward. There's a list. I've got a few more that we can talk about, but the most amazing one on the list is a company called Honeywell. And I've worked with Honeywell for decades. I worked with Honeywell back when Honeywell had computers that they sold to businesses that took up the size, a good sized room. But Honeywell has diversified. They've done a lot of different things. And part of their core business today is actually helping other businesses digitize themselves and become a digital enterprise. And they took and pointed those things that they were helping other companies do back at themselves by streamlining their processes and following those things. And let's see, I just pulled up Honeywell stock. Back in 2017, you could buy a share of Honeywell for about $100, and today, just a few years later, we're now looking at over $200 a share. So this is a company that not only preaches digital enterprise, but practices digital enterprise. And I tell you, that's the kind of companies that we're going to see around 20 years from now. We won't see Kodaks. We won't see Sears stores. By the way, what's that? And others that could not make the change. Digital enterprise is here to stay. One final comment about digital enterprise is it's really easy for me to start talking about the business aspects of it and to start talking about the technology aspects of it. But the most important aspect of it is what you're looking at on the screen right now. It's the faces of people. That's why we go through this process. We don't go through this process so that we can have really cool technology, which I like, but we do it because it brings products to market faster. It brings products to market that are more targeted towards what individuals want. And from the business aspect, shareholder value and all the other stakeholders and their value. So even though we're talking about digitalization, computerization, modernization, what we're really talking about today is people.
Thank you, Professor David Markley. How do you want to analyze today's sessions and topic especially?
Well, I actually come out of the world of the creative community, so I've actually worked with a number of filmmakers, and actually was fascinated by what Professor Hudgens was saying about the history of photography, because we've actually seen that with filmmakers and with musicians. Because I've actually worked doing festivals as well as a number of whether it's a music festival or a film festival, or also serving as a manager or an agent for different artists as well. And definitely we've seen that the digitalization has impacted those industries as well. I mean, we can remember a time when it was going to be very difficult for anybody to make a true film and all of that. But now with the more access to cameras, and definitely more digital cameras, a lot of folks are able to make a very successful film with not to, just have to get the standard cast and the standard folks together, and then you can go out and make a very good film. And I've seen some tremendous films made with just even the digital phone. So the standard phone that you may have in your pocket or near your desk or whatever, the iPhone or something like that. Folks have made actual successful films using that kind of equipment. They've also made successful music videos. As a matter of fact, on one of my friend's shows just recently, he had a gentleman that did an entire music video revolving around a lot of the social justice ills and things that are going on in our society. And he was a New York gentleman, but he did that film along with the assistance of his daughter and others, that was done pretty much just off of the iPhone. So he walked around, capturing some of the ways that New York was under lockdown and some of that kind of despair that was going on. And he put that on his digital phone, and then he uploaded it and made it into a very successful music video. So that's some of the ways that we're seeing creative folks use the whole concept of digital enterprise. And I agree that it is something that is going to be even more prevalent in society as we continue going on. I can't think of any aspect of our life that we're not using digital enterprise. I mean, if you want to go buy a house now, how are you actually going to look at the house? You're probably going to do an online tour. Isn't that a form of digitalization? And even if you're going to go to a restaurant, you might be using one of the sites that is out there that's going to be a review site, something like Yelp or something like that. And that's another form of digitalization as well. And then if you're even going to go even into our personal lives and things of that nature. I mean, a lot of times people will do those whole swipe left and swipe right kind of programs and everything. And that is also a form of digitalization as well. Don't know that that's necessarily the way that I want to pick significant others, but a lot of our young folks are very much into that way of communicating and doing things along that line. But definitely, we're seeing the impact of digitalization on a regular basis. My concern, and I think that actually the young lady from South Africa kind of alluded to it and everything, is that there is still an existing digital divide. Because while I have not one, but two laptops here in my home office and everything, there are some parts of the country where people don't have access to the kind of computers and the kind of things that they need in order to get out in the broader world of marketplace. Now, if they get this equipment and if they get things that they are able to have access to, whether that's, because sometimes people don't always have the Wi-Fi access that they need, and there's other reasons that people may not have access to what they need and all of that. But if they get access, it's a total leveling of the playing field. I mean, I could actually, try to market to somebody in South Africa, in Ghana, in Asia, and in a number of other places when we have the access. But we definitely have to make sure that as the digitalization continues and as we make this even more of what's going on in the world, that we make sure that we are giving access to all aspects of our community and that it doesn't become a class issue. So that's some of my thoughts about what's going on in the world now.
Thank you. Professor Edward, I think you want to add some point, but I have a specific question about that. Internet is very important for this digital enterprise, but fact is that still internet is not available for many developing countries. I think Brenda has problem, Africa has lot of problem, even many countries like Bangladesh or Nepal or even many countries has still problem. What do you think? What will happen? Even whatever we discuss about, we want to reach more people, we want to reach billions of people, but what happened in this internet industry?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll start off by saying the good news for Mark and for everyone else is that, in fact, we haven't really had the digital divide that people feared in the 1990s. Right now, for example, 16 years ago or 17 years ago, there was no such thing as a smartphone. Now, 70 some percent of Americans have smartphones. If you look at the penetration and the time that it took for people in at least this is talking about the United States, and I suspect the numbers are the same in a lot of the industrialized countries, for people to have access to either a desktop computer, a laptop computer, or access to a computer, for example, through a local library. In the United States, it's now something like 90% or higher. We've seen the very quick development of 4G Wi-Fi, and now 5G is coming in. And so if you look at the trend compared to past trends in terms of, for example, how fast does 50% of the population get telephones or electricity or running water or things like that. The good news is that with exponential technology, the process has been much, much faster than it has been in decades and even centuries in the past. And this is not to say that there are not places that still need it. It's just that that's the good news. If the trend continues, we're looking at a pretty good situation. But you mentioned in less developed countries, and of course, that is where there are still problems. I mean, you discussed Bangladesh. I know that I was on with Brenda yesterday talking about Africa and the needs of Africa as well. And again, this is why I say that in terms of focus, if you are a policymaker or if you are a nonprofit, especially in some of the less developed countries, one of the things you really should focus on is upgrading the communications technology, because that gives you access to everything. It gives you access to education. I consider education the most important thing. The human mind is the human mind is the value creator. And so once you get access, for example, to Wi-Fi and to the internet, then the whole world is open to you, not just for commercial activities, but for education and everything else. I'll say one other final thing about digitalization is, some of you mentioned about the fact that we can have face-to-face conversations here, which is wonderful. One of the great things, if you want to say that something good happened during the COVID pandemic, is that people were able to keep in touch. My children are in the other room. My two 10-year-olds are going to school right now on Zoom. It would be better perhaps if they were in their classrooms, but at least they're in contact with their friends and their teachers and so forth. And what I'm predicting is that in the next 5 years or 10 years, and David, you might have better predictions than I do, and I would defer to you on these things, we will be having this conversation with avatars of ourselves in 3 dimensions using virtual reality. And we'll have our headsets on, and I'll be seeing you guys sitting in a chair. Maybe you just scan your own body, so I'm really seeing you in 3D. Or maybe you put an avatar in there, whatever you want to do. My kids like the idea of, they don't want to look like themselves. They want to look like their favorite, cartoon characters or something. But the point is, that's what you're going to see in the future more, and we can interact even better that way instead of having to, this way, or even fly to, some place where we can't afford at the moment.
Mhm. I think Markley, I think you want to add some point?
Yeah, I was actually wondering, and this is actually for the rest of the panel as well, but one of the things that I've been fascinated by, and I'm curious to see what people think about this, is that as we've been in the middle of this COVID crisis, and as we're coming out of it, more and more people are going back into the workforce. And I know that a number of large corporations are getting their employees to come back into the workforce. And there's a little bit of resistance to this because people have gotten used to being in the remote environment because of having access that you're talking about and everything. So I was wondering, do folks that are on the panel with me think that this is going to be the new trend where more and more people are going to be doing kind of that combination of remote and in person? Because a lot of times people in the corporate level want the in-person employee there because they want to be able to micromanage them to some degree and to make sure that they are actually, working on what they're supposed to be working on and not necessarily doing the dishes while they're supposed to be working on whatever their job is, or playing on the computer when they're supposed to be doing their schoolwork and everything. So I was just wondering, do we think that there's going to be more of a trend this way? And I'm just going to add one little footnote, as I've even heard that even those that have pets are wondering about that as well, because one of the things that I read yesterday was that some of our pet owners are finding out that the pets are starting to suffer from withdrawal as well, because their owners, whatever, their partners in crime, if you want to put it that way, with the pets and the humans, are actually going back to the workforce. And they had actually gotten used to people being there with them and spending a lot of time with them. And now they're going back into the workforce. So now the pets are suffering from withdrawal, is what some pet psychologists are saying, and all of that. But I would love to hear what folks' thoughts are about the new version of how we're going to come out of the pandemic in the work environment and the digital landscape.
Thank you. Madam DC Simon.
I think David had a comment first, and then I'll comment. Go ahead, David.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
Yes.
I'll be quick. That's something, Mark, that I come up across quite a bit with some of the businesses that I work with as well. And my experience, and my experience only in that area, is it depends on the business. Now, I've had some businesses that their ownership feels like they need to see and reach out and touch people. And those are some of the hardest people to transform moving forward into the digital world. The easiest ones are the ones where I've come in and they've already started allowing, before the pandemic, they started allowing people to work from home, originally as a perk. And then they realized that, say, for example, one of the businesses that I was working with has a 400-seat call center. At 401 seats, they need more brick and mortar space. They need more air conditioning. They need more desks. They need more electricity. They need more security. So they use the brick and mortar space to train their people. And then when they've reached a certain level of trust, and I'll come back to trust in a second, when they've reached a certain level of trust, those people go home. They go home with a company computer. They go home with 2 big computer screens. They go home with company provided not only internet, but an extended company network, so that they have direct access at home to the company network, exactly like what they would have had in the business. The reason they do that is that infrastructure is more agile, another buzzword that's really working into the business world these days, because that can be moved from place to place very easily. Brick and mortar can't be. And how they capitalize their costs also have something to do with that. Now, coming back to trust comes twofold. They've watched these people and developed these people in-house, and they know how they work. But a call center is a very good example of where the company has online metrics. How many calls did you do today? How long did each call take? The customer survey that comes up afterwards. How happy was the customer with that progress? And that fits very well into the metrics. And the metrics that are used for the people at home are exactly the same metrics as for the people that are used in the office. Now being able to explore other possibilities of where they can move faster, move more flexibly, is a much easier conversation with them. So that's what I wanted to say. Dawn?
Thank you. And I agree with what you're saying, David. It's worth hearing. I am the president of the local chapter of IT Service Management Forum in the heart of Silicon Valley. So digital transformation, digital environments are something that's not only comfortable to me, it's very familiar in the Valley. However, when we talk about the digital divide, it is everywhere. We need, as an industry, to be the best where we are and expand and embrace the changes that require us to become more agile. So I think it's interesting to note, probably a little discerning too, to note that in the USA, in Silicon Valley, at the start of the COVID pandemic, 67,000 students did not have adequate training, computers, and access to their schools. So when you talk about your children going to school in Zoom, in the USA, as well as Bangladesh, as well as Africa, we have people that do not have access to the things that will develop them. One of the wonderful things that was brought to the Asian population, Asian education, and then to the world was the Khan Academy. Khan Academy started as a simple, I'm going to help my nephew do math better. And it became a free access to very good quality education that enables and uplifts everybody that can have access. We need to allow people to have access. Now I'd like to bring that around and talk about how, when you're managing your business well, you can uplift your community, you can uplift your world. ServiceNow was a very good story about that. ServiceNow during the pandemic did some things in business that wasn't done before. One of the things that they did is brick and mortar stores. You had to continue. I was working for a company, a $9 billion supermarket in Southern California during the pandemic when it started this time last year. And they were told, you have to find a way to stay open. All of a sudden, these stores that were very traditional, in the office every day, in the store every day, enabling the business, keeping food supplies on the shelves, were challenged by putting more stuff on the shelves faster, new cleaning criteria, new HR criteria, and oh, by the way, now we have to manage COVID as a business too, for us to be an essential worker. ServiceNow brought immediately, within weeks, they had tools to help business of all sizes manage the pandemic. They're enabling workflows to deal with the complexity. Fix it once at a big level, share it with everybody, and you can enable and uplift your community. The other thing that ServiceNow did that was really cool during the pandemic is, you know, when you talk about all of these assets that we are able and blessed to be able to use, ServiceNow was looking at their asset flow. They transformed their asset work stream and identified idle assets that they were going to throw away or contribute to somebody, trash them. That activity, that single activity of managing their business well and identifying idle assets, allowed them to bring the digital divide in the Bay Area, where 67,000 students did not have access, to 13,000. A lot more work needs to be done. What if 2 or 3 more companies in a community were able to fix that problem and then start to move to the rest of the world?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just
Thank
add
you.
one other thing,
Yes.
just really quickly, and then I want to hear from my sister in South Africa. But one of the things I was getting ready to mention was there was a move before COVID that I really was finding really a good move to help even get more and more people involved. Unfortunately, what I'm going to mention also had some internal problems, as well as then COVID came and disrupted everything. And that was the move toward co-working spaces. And a lot of those co-working spaces were really good. And there was a lot of ways that people were able to get access to the computers that they needed, and also have shared resources among folks that were working in the space. You might find somebody that was a musician working with an accountant, and they were all in that space together and everything. But unfortunately, one of those larger companies we worked had some internal divides and things going on in their business, and then COVID came and disrupted a lot of these spaces. I know they still exist, but they don't exist as much because there's all of the COVID protocols that you have to have as well. So, like I said, I'm hoping that as we get more and more out of the pandemic, we will see the return of those kind of co-working spaces, and maybe even some of those co-working spaces being created in places that are going to not have as much need for the space that they used to have. I'm thinking about like universities, if more of our students are going to be going online and things of that nature. So I'm hoping that we'll see a re-evaluation and a rebirth of those co-working spaces. That's just kind of my own personal wish. But What does my
Thank you.
sister from South Africa have to say?
Thank you. Yes, Madam Brenda.
Yes. So I'm gonna start with the whole hybrid workforce or working thing. I think there's going to be the trend, and this is based on what my experience, what I have seen. And I mean, I think about a week or two ago, I actually on my social page, I asked that particular question to say, if with now COVID getting under control, would you like to work more at home and both, or would you like to totally work online? Most of the people that came back, I think about 90% of the people that responded said to me that they would like to do both because one, they get bored at home and they would like to interact with people. So they would like to spend some of those times back with their colleagues at work. But they also don't want to be there all the time. They enjoy the interaction online and being able to be flexible and, control or manage their own time. So for me, I see this trend continuing even post-COVID. Another thing about the working spaces, you are right. Even in South Africa, especially corporate South Africa, we saw that trend growing where we have these shared spaces. Even in organization that we working, that the organization that I used to work for, we had what we call green spaces. So this is where people we had the hot desks. So you don't have a desk assigned to a particular person. Anybody who is in the office at a particular time can take the desk and use it. And what we saw is people were collaborating more because there was open plan. Now people are not sitting in their offices feeling all important. People were collaborating more. People were able to be more creative. People got there, did their jobs and left. They were much more conscious of the time that they spent at work than just sitting there and waiting for the time to the clock to tick so they can go home. So I think for me it is much more, it produced much more, there was much more production or productivity when people work in that kind of setting. Now, coming back to what you asked, Sharif, around access and internet and all of that, that is a huge issue. It is a huge issue in developed countries and also in the countries that are not developed. If I just take South Africa, for example, as I said right now, I'm in Johannesburg, which is the economic capital of South Africa. I still have issues with the internet. And depending on what time I log in, depending on the traffic and all of that, I still have those issues. There are people that are still in Johannesburg that do not have access to your Wi-Fi and all of those things. There are still people that do not have smartphones. When COVID started, what the government did was for students, for example, so that they can enable them to continue with their studies while they're sitting at home, there was a move to buy them laptops, and some were bought smartphones, so at least they can connect and they can get their study material online and be able to connect. But one thing that they had forgotten is that some of these kids have gone home and they stay in the rural areas. There is no fiber there. They cannot connect to the internet. And if they can connect, it's only for a limited time. Some of them can connect, but they do not have the skills to be able to go on to Zoom. I mean, I think I am tech savvy a little bit, but I struggled with some of these things. I had to familiarize myself with these things. So these things go hand in hand for me. So we need to ensure that, one, we change the way we do things, in that we don't just throw things at people, skill them so that when you give them these things, they are able to use them, and they are able to use them in such a way that they benefit, in such a way that it still meets the initial objective of them having this thing. There's no point in me having access to data if I don't know what I'm going to do with that data. So it means, as organizations, governments, as individuals, we really, really need to look at these things and say, what do I need? Why do I need that thing? And if I have it, how am I going to use it? So organizations really can succeed and they can grow exponentially if the organizations are properly planning for this thing. They don't just do it because everybody does it. And they can be very successful. I mean, if I give an example of TEFs, the organization that I am part of, Edward is the CEO at TEFs as well. I mean, I joined this organization in 2019. To this day, I think I've met 3 officials from TEFs physically. Most of them I've met online, but we have made so much progress. It is a digital organization and it has reached so many people across the world because the reach is digitized and we can spread across the globe without actually having to go there. Yesterday or 2 days ago, we were doing a course with Tikeria University, which is in Nigeria, where 4 of our officials were giving a lecture there. And it was a wonderful thing. We produced the book that Edward was just showing now. So there's so much that we can do by embracing digitization, but we need to do it properly. And we need to ensure that we have the enablers to allow these people to do these things going forward.
Thank you. Professor Edward, actually Brenda bring many important points, especially she is analyzing how we can develop a strong ecosystem through this digital enterprise and internet solutions and everything. So my point of view is that as you are a policy analyst and you have a strong engagement with research industries and this kind of things, how actually government should play a role beside these NGOs and the other initiative to solve this problem? Example, how they can work together for solve these internet problems, or introduce more technology in their inside their countries.
A couple of points. This and Brenda's points were all very, very well taken. By the way, it's interesting because the organization I worked for, the research organization I worked for before I founded the new group I'm with now, had its headquarters outside of Chicago, but at least 10 of our people were in my area. 3 of us were in the Washington, D.C. area. 1 was in the Boston area. A couple were in Florida. 1 was in California. A couple were in Texas. And so I'm used to this kind of situation. And we would simply fly out to Chicago every 3 or 4 months when we really needed to physically get together. But this discussion, and especially about, for example, the situation in Silicon Valley that we've heard about, I think makes a very important point, and that is, and this is for governments and this is for private institutions, appreciate the importance of entrepreneurship. In other words, I talked about Kodak and how Kodak failed to be entrepreneurial. Now, where I live outside of Washington, D.C., we are a very tech savvy area, and even so, when people didn't expect what was going to happen with COVID. So in my area, that right after it happened a year ago, our education, system had to struggle very, very fast to come up with ways of allowing students access. We have pretty good access here in this area, but they very quickly got Chromebooks. These are the very less costly laptop computers. You can't do all the cool stuff, but you can go on and do your schoolwork. So they very quickly moved to do that, and it was a little bit of a rough transition, but that happens because they just didn't expect it. What Dawn discusses about how it wasn't just a matter of people didn't have access in Silicon Valley, but they didn't have the skills, because up until that time they probably didn't need it. Maybe they go on their computers to do some games and all. And now, guess what? They've discovered this is something that they need. So I think the important thing is for governments especially to look to what is needed to facilitate, not only, of course, the access to the internet, which communications is absolutely crucial, but to do it in such a way that you allow for innovators to come in and do it in different ways. And one of the controversies in this country, literally today, is the federal government is talking about a huge capacity, 100 megabit capacity or gigabit capacity for 100% of the people. And they're looking at government maybe putting a lot of money, billions of dollars, into fiber optics. And I think that that's a mistake in this sense, because, for example, we have Elon Musk putting up satellites that can perhaps deliver internet service to rural areas much, much cheaper. You also have to ask about, is that capacity really necessary for everyone? It would be nice, but is current capacity perfectly fine for most people at most times? And so I look at the different technologies. I look at fiber. I look at Wi-Fi towers, which we have in my area. I look at satellites. I look at all of these competing ways of access. And what I'd suggest to governments is to keep the system as open as possible, so that you don't put all of your resources into one technology, and thereby sort of eliminate the possibilities of other technologies, because then you get into the problem of Kodak putting all of its resources into just producing film and paper, whereas you have this other technology that came in and one other final thing I'll mention, because we've been talking about the mix. I'm sorry, Mark is not on our discussion right now, but the mix between doing things in person and doing things the way we're doing right now. And one of the fascinating discussions in Peter Diamandis's book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, is transportation innovations that in the future, whether it's 5 years or 10 years is hard to say, where it'll be much, much cheaper for somebody, or less costly for somebody, certainly in developed countries, to live in a more rural area and then very, very quickly get into an office that might be a half an hour away or more, and, without having to spend an hour sitting in traffic or something like that. So it might be that a transportation revolution, at least in the developed countries, will allow for this mix. I don't know what it's going to be, but that's why entrepreneurship is so important. So my advice to governments is, yes, you have to, especially in less developed countries, work on the technology that's going to allow access to the information through the internet. But don't be too strict about looking at just one source, because it might be that satellites can come in and do for Bangladesh, what it could do for rural areas in the United States. Dawn looks like she has something to say too.
When you're done.
Yes.
What you said really struck for me a really important topic, and what I would call for governments to do. In fact, I am calling for governments to do now. I founded COVID19COE.com for a very good reason. And that is, we have a travesty of healthcare process, not in our country, but in our world. And I am calling on governments to break down the walls of how we address this global pandemic that is COVID. But it's not just COVID, it's healthcare in general. And as a citizen of the United States, I'm calling on our government to break down the walls of healthcare limitation. As one of the wealthiest nations of the world, there is no reason why we have the level of uninsured, uncaring government that cannot address the needs of its people. We also need to get involved with the World Health Organizations and be accountable to driving policy, driving resource and innovation, and sharing what we have in our wealth of knowledge with the less developed countries, like in Africa, in Bangladesh, in India, where they don't have the resources. Share the resources, share the wealth. Knowledge is free, but we're making it too difficult. We need to come together.
Yeah, Dawn, can I just make a quick,
Please do.
Very quick comment here? And this is a bigger topic, and I know Sharif has done, and will do sessions on this as well, because this is an area where I've done a lot of work, a lot of research. We don't have in the United States, and frankly in a lot of other countries, a healthcare system. We have a sick care system.
Right.
Basically, once you get sick, then the insurance company might pay for a little bit of or some percentage of it. And part of it is because we have regulations in each state that govern insurance industries. We have most of the medical costs come from older people, because once you get old, then that's when you need healthcare the most. We have a system in the United States called Medicare, and it is such a spaghetti mix of incomprehensible regulations that costs are. Yeah, and I some of them on this call know that last year my 89-year-old dad was in and out of the hospital more than he was ever at home. He's now in assisted living, and so I had to deal with a lot of doctors. I had to deal with Medicare, myself. And I've done scholarly work in this area. So to me, it's not, the government should double down on their already incredibly inefficient, messed up, costly system. It's to look at innovative ways, and there are innovative ways to deliver this. And I'll mention something else, since you want to talk about digitalization and healthcare, even in less developed countries. There's some fascinating things going on, for example, in Africa and other places where with remote diagnostics, instead of building hundreds and hundreds of brick and mortar hospitals, you can, for example, in a rural area, if it has access to the internet, you can do a blood test with some of the most innovative diagnostic technology. There's a thing called a lab on a chip, and you can do that, and immediately, the information is sent to a lab that might be 50 miles away, and they do the evaluation, and they come up with what the patient might need, even though the patient's in a more rural area. It costs a fraction of the cost. It's a fraction of the time. Now, you still have issues of how do you administer the treatment, but that's the sort of thing that we're talking about with digitalization. We're not just talking about being able to produce products better and services better, but delivering healthcare better. And it's a fascinating area, and I'm looking forward to future discussions on this, because I want to see a real healthcare system, not a sick care system. David and I are working with the Transhumanist Party on exactly these issues. So it's fascinating.
I'm a fan. And the problem is, we have the foundation. We have the ability to solve this problem, but we are not focused on health. We are not focused on welfare. We are focused on just dealing with the sick. Yes, I like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Professor David.
Great discussion. I want to bring it back, from my viewpoint, back to focus on the people. I want to get back to the digital divide question here a little bit. I've been looking at what's been going on with COVID and technology in the United States. I talked a little bit about work at home earlier. I'm going to bring that back up again because I think work at home is actually an incentive to solve the digital divide problem. There's other incentives as well, but work at home is something that impacts businesses directly. So for places where they have had people work at home, many times that computing infrastructure in the house was improved, the connection to the house was improved, many times by the businesses paying for it, not the people themselves paying for it. So how does that help with digital divide? Well, here's one of the other trends that I've been noticing, is that a company that brings somebody in and trains them up, spends a great deal amount of money on them, and then sends them home with company provided equipment. That person works at home. I'm here in the Phoenix, Arizona area. So they move to one of the boroughs of Phoenix, if you will, one of the other cities that are around. And they work there for a couple of years, and they are a very good employee. And they say, you know what? My ailing grandmother up in rural Oregon needs me to come up and assist them. In the past, the conversation would have been, I'm giving you my 2 weeks notice and I've already started looking for other employment. But the conversation has been changing to, would it be possible for me to take all this equipment and move to Oregon or to Idaho or to Montana and continue to work for you? And the business looks at it and says, the only thing that I'm going to have is the uninstall and the reinstall costs of the equipment. I'm not going to have to train a new employee. And I know that I'm able to keep that. So that moves that infrastructure into that small town. And we're seeing more and more of this. I think Dawn probably in the Silicon Valley area is seeing that because, or Ed in the Washington, D.C. area, anywhere where the expenses are really high, if I can take my Phoenix salary and move to some town that you never heard of and continue to work, that Phoenix salary goes a long way. So there's a benefit there for me as well. There's a benefit to the company, and that becomes a natural driver. So how does this play into politics? Edward's right. Both him and I work with the Transhumanist Party, that we are a policy-oriented party interested in moving technology and scientific discussions into the political landscape. So how does this help from a politics standpoint? Well, my view on this is that politics needs to be looking at trying to find these naturally occurring drivers in society and say, what can we do from a governmental standpoint to move those forward and to be quick to change when one of those changes, because government and political organizations need to be agile as well as businesses need to be agile. So instead of investing in fiber optics as the sole means of providing gigabit internet to everybody, let's look at the technologies and let's find ways for government incentives for the ones that are working. And then let's keep our eyes on what are the new emerging technologies and shift to them, focus with them, and the agile. And we're not taking money away from the companies that we're working with now because they too are agile, and we'll see that coming and we'll work and shift. And this is something that can really benefit people, which is where I started.
Thank you, Madam Brenda.
Yeah, so as far as government is concerned, I don't think agility appears in any of their vocab. I don't think that exists anywhere in the world. Implementation is something that they talk about, but it takes forever to happen. So I think major change and transformation needs to happen at government level. And it needs to be an involvement of each and every one of us in the society. So if we're going to just wait for government to do things and we are not pushing them to do them, or doing some of these things ourselves, chances of these things happening in this lifetime are very, very slim. So from where I sit, I think collaboration between the private and public sector becomes very, very key when we start to talk about digitization, and when we start to talk about exponential growth, exponential changes that are happening right now. But what they could do back in their offices when they are not entertaining politics is to ensure that they put together strategies that are both forward-looking, they are transdisciplinary, they are multifaceted. It's one thing to just have a look at technology and say, technology is changing at a high rate. And you say, what do I need? You need to have a look as, if I change this technology, how is it going to affect the health center? How is it going to affect the education sector? How is it going to affect media? And say, with all of those impacts, what is it that I need to do now to ensure that we minimize the negativity of the impact and maximize what the opportunities that come with this thing? So there is one thing that I have not seen a lot of government doing, and I think we need to start moving in that trend. I'm fortunate enough to be sitting in South Africa in one of the the advisory committee for the fourth industrial revolution implementation for the Media, Information, Communication and Technology Center. And what we are trying to do, the reason why that committee was put together was to say, let's have a look at what are the needs right now within South Africa in terms of what's coming down the line and what are the things that we need to do from an education point of view, from a policy point of view. We are changing policies. We are saying what we are doing research and trying to tap onto expertise across the world and saying, if you have done it, how have you done it? Countries that are not as developed as South Africa is, have you done something? Can we learn from you? Countries that are already developed, what is it that we can learn from their failures and their successes? And I'm hoping it will go a long way. But as is the case with every government, implementation takes a long time. So if we can start introducing this thing of really trying to implement as fast as this change comes, is we're going to change this thing. By the time we want to implement, the train would have, or the ship would have sailed a long time ago, and then we have to start again and try to catch something there. So we'll just play catch up as we go along. So that for me is very important. And as well, I think, I'm not sure if it was Don or Edward, he mentioned the fact that we need to be innovative as well. A government needs to be very innovative. Gone are the days where innovation came from the private sector. We need to have governments that are forward-looking. Don't just look at what's happening now. Look at what's coming 10 years from now. Start doing this scenario planning and say, if it comes, what will it mean and what do I need to do now so that when that change comes, I'm ready today. So do not change curriculum at higher education. Remember, there's that child that is starting in grade 1. What is going to happen to him in 10 years when he gets to that higher learning level? So we need to ensure that we are creative, we are forward-looking, we are quick to implement, because technology is exponential, change is rapid, and if we are going to be competitive, and if we are going to make sure that we sustain and develop our economies, we need to ensure that we also play in that field.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for joining today's sessions, World Talent Economy Forums. Actually, this is our 252 episode. So share our content as much as possible. Share with your classroom, with your policymakers, with your corporations, with your community, with your startup. I'm sure there are many, many valuable content we have right now, World Talent Economy Forum. And by this way, you can gain new experience, new knowledge from our speakers. And I want to give special thanks our speakers, those who continuously support our World Talent Economy Forum initiative. And we are open for collaborations because we have to solve many problems from our local community. So we want to collaborate with all of our speakers and their organizations. And we are very much open that how we can solve the global problem. Even if we are global community, but in the locally we have many challenges, so we need to work together. That is our objective. And the audience, please share our content. I'm sure it will be very helpful for your developments. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. I want to start from Professor Edward, then Madam DC Simon, then Professor David Schumacher, and finally Brenda.
Well, thank you again for a wonderful session. I always enjoy these, and I hope that your audience takes away some insights from our discussions. And I would, going back to the topic of digitalization, I think we've seen exactly how businesses should, as David has suggested, shouldn't just take a technology and say, oh, this is a neat new toy. They have to look at how it fits into the entire business strategy, and where it works, use it. Where it might not work or might not be that efficient, don't use it. Be entrepreneurial. I think we see the same thing in terms of the broader society and with government. I am not an anarchist. Some people accuse me of being one. I'm more of a limited government person, but I see a role for government. But I recognize, as Brenda seems to suggest, that governments are very slow to do things. Governments often, just like Kodak was very slow to get into digital cameras, and in fact went bankrupt because they didn't. Governments do the same thing. They keep with what they had in the past. They have thousands of bureaucrats who are working in those areas, and they're loath to give up their privileges and their jobs. And I mentioned in this country, we have a sick care system with hundreds of thousands of bureaucrats whose jobs depend on keeping a sick care system as opposed to a healthcare system. I was, by the way, an elected official. I was elected on my city commission where I used to live. And when we brought in cable, I remember the big discussion was, well, the local government wanted to decide which cable company to allow in, and they would make that decision based on how much the cable company would pay the government. So it wasn't necessarily what is going to be best. And so they limited, at least we got cable, but they limited competition. And then, of course, pretty soon, Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi towers came in and, it competed with the cable. So as I say, governments have to be involved. They have to be as innovative as possible, but they have to leave a situation open so that entrepreneurs can come in and offer different alternatives. And in this case, satellites are a good way to provide internet and digital access. Cable is another way. Wi-Fi is another way. Let's keep the system as open as possible and hope the governments facilitate rather than getting in the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam DC Salmon.
Thank you. This was a great session today. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of it. Love to participate on this panel. Something Brenda said has stuck with me, and I think I would close with this type of thought. She said, what do we need to do to be more forward-looking? That is the key question. It really is. When we think about digital enterprise and transforming the digital ecosystem, as Edward had talked about, the need is so great in the healthcare environment. We have sick care because we have pharmaceuticals driving what kind of decisions. When pharmaceuticals and healthcare insurance drives delivery, it's going to drive sickness. We need to focus on what does wellness look like. What do we need as a country, as a world, to connect to one another, to really use the skills, the people, the talent, and the processes that we have to transform our economy to a more global, more inclusive, more healthy economy? There's a lot we can do. We've got the foundation. It's just how will we use that to connect to one another to really make that difference?
Thank you. Professor David Schumacher.
I agree. It's been a very good session today. I've enjoyed this. How I want to end is talking that digital enterprise is an opportunity for entrepreneurs if you are forward-looking. And it doesn't require a large company to do that. Digital enterprise levels the playing field, if you will, between the large and small companies, because the large companies are shifting too. And they've got a huge boat that they're shifting. Earlier in my talk, I said that it took Best Buy 7 years to go through their digital transformation. If you're willing, put on your hat as a enterprising entrepreneur with a small business mindset and say, what would I like to do in the next 3 to 7 years? You can be competing pretty much on the same terms as these very large organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And you are not trying to change. You're not trying to transform. You can start right from the beginning with the idea of digital enterprise in your small business. But you do that by focusing on the people. You do that by being forward-looking. And when you do that, you can have success. This is an opportunity. So let's think about that a little bit. This is an opportunity.
Thank you. Madam Brenda, what are the concluding remarks for today?
Thanks again for inviting me here, Sharif, and thanks to all the panelists. I've learned so much from everyone around the table. I think for me, the most important thing is that we need to realize that, with digitization, we're always crying about people not embracing technology. And my view is that some of them don't do it because they don't understand it. Skills development is very important. Let's skill people, let them understand what this brings, and let them understand what the risks that come with this are, and so that they are able to manage this going forward, so that the impact is not negative. The impact is something that they can benefit out of. Collaboration, very important between private sector and the public sector. We cannot just wait for governments to do things for us. As organizations, what are the things that we can do in our own organization to be able to advance the communities that we operate in? What are the things that we can do as individuals back in our own households to ensure that our kids, our relatives are skilled in this thing? Because if we don't do that, they are going to be left behind. We are going to be left behind. If it's about advancing humanity, each and every one of us need to play a role. And let's stop with the silo mentality. This thing touches every part of humanity, every part of the community. So I can learn from a person in health, I can learn from a person in pure technology, or a person that's just sitting there as a carpenter. So it is very important to start listening and seeing what it is that we can take in to be able to work together to advance humanity going forward. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions, and hopefully the futures we can invite more of you and we can arrange more important discussions for change this world. Thank you everyone. Thank you Professor Edward. Thank you DC Simon. Thank you Professor David, and thank you Madam Brenda for joining today's session. Bye. Take care.
Bye all.